and welcome to today's ExchangeWire Vox Pop. I'm John Still, Head of Content at ExchangeWire, and today we'll be discussing the practical and functional applications for Web3 and the hurdles that Web3 tech needs to overcome to reach its potential. I'm joined today by George Tertois, co-founder at Web3 specialist agency. George, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, John. Great to speak with you again.
No, great to have your expertise. So you're working at agency at the moment, and that's, you're at the heart of a lot of what's going on in Web3. And it's great just to get your insights on the practical applications for Web3, what's going to go on. We've chatted about it for a few weeks now. So I suppose first question is, what do you see as the functional applications of Web3, and what's the true gateway into a more practical user-centric Web3?
So it's worth noting that it's still evolving. There's numerous kind of marketing functionalities already out there, but they have a huge potential to reshape what various industries and enable new forms of kind of collaboration, commerce, communication. But the things that are out there at the moment that you've probably heard of and that are quite important, I think probably deserve a bit of a mention. Decentralized finance, DeFi, non-fungible tokens, NFTs, the gaming and virtual worlds like Roblox, decentralized computing, identity and privacy, as well as, I think like marketplaces and commerce, so peer-to-peer intermediaries, sales, like when no intermediaries taking a cut. I think these are all things that we've probably heard of. If you're not in the space, maybe not so much, but the big one and the most significant transformation piece I see is decentralized finance. And that's where, it aims to open kind of permissionless and global financial ecosystems, which is very on the nose at the moment with some of the news we've kind of heard across the pond with SVB. So yeah, I think that's probably where I'd like to focus around this question, and some of the key aspects of that around like accessibility. So DeFi platforms are accessible to anyone with an internet connection. I think that kind of happens across with banking, but especially if you're trying to emigrate or relocate or whatever, that can be an absolute real hassle with the kind of traditional banking format. We talk about transparency a lot within the world of data and everything like that, but with blockchain technology, that really ensures that transactions and financial data are transparent and easily auditable, therefore reducing the risk of things like fraud, increasing trust in the system, which I think is lacking at the moment. Then there's the interoperability, which I can never say properly, but I think I got it out there okay. And yeah, that's around kind of the protocols of platforms that can be easily integrated and connected, so less reliant on kind of legacy monoliths and things like that, where people can kind of take a bit more ownership of their financial services. Again, that kind of leads into the programmability of stuff as well, which, the smart contracts that enable the kind of, again, as I talked around, the kind of customizable financial products that you want for you that are specific for you. So, that's where it can get really exciting. And I guess the final bit to round this off is around that self-custody. So users maintain control over their assets. And, we've seen it with the first crash, back in kind of 2008, 2009. We're probably seeing a little bit of the same kind of haunted things that are happening at the moment, unfortunately. And I think this is going to become really, really important to people as going forward. And I had a really interesting conversation actually with a bit of an older gentleman, and he's lost all faith in the banks and things like that. And he's now popped all his money into crypto, which seems, quite progressive for his time, but a lot of people are feeling the same way about the same thing. So I think, yeah, to summarize, like these applications that I mentioned, some of the ones at the start, they're all being used across the ecosystem at the moment. What Web3 can offer from a technology point of view continues to evolve. There are definitely more use cases that are emerging. And I think, yeah, I'm really excited to see how that kind of will reshape our digital lives, as well as the way that we interact with the internet. But the first one I'm kind of, there's already boomed and backing is DeFi, but I think that's going to really kind of take over in the next kind of 2 or 3 years from a mass adoption point of view.
You've hit on a couple of parts there. We had a great quote from Ben Putley from Alkimi the other week, and he was saying that the funny thing is it's great for transparency because it removes the need for transparency because it is all just Web3. Everything it's all quantified, codified. But yeah, is that the gateway is into this more practical user-centric world?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's the gate. I don't think the DeFi maybe isn't the gateway. What I think really, and a simple answer to what the kind of true gateway is to a more practical and user-centric Web3 is the simple answer for me is a frictionless on-ramp to Web3. So you might not even know it's happening. But what I mean by that really is, to get a more practical user-centric Web3 through development of kind of user-friendly interfaces, applications that can effectively bridge the gap between the complexities of what Web3 is and the blockchain side of it, as well, and then versus the kind of average user ability to use it. So at the moment, I think a lot of people seems quite complex. There's lots of stuff that we talk about that I think we have to check ourselves on being in the bubble of Web3, where we might, use jargon or language that seems quite complicated. Obviously, there's lots of complex kind of technology that sits behind Web3 as well. But ultimately, and similar to what we did from the Web 1 to Web 2 evolution, which is get kind of really into that user experience. So to kind of overcome these challenges, we need to kind of focus on creating intuitive, user-friendly interfaces, design, that kind of walkthrough process. So you wouldn't even know that you're kind of on-ramping to Web3. And I think that's really key. We focus a lot of that at Eidgensi as well, which is how can we bridge the gap between Web 2 and Web 3? Because there's lots of great stuff that still happens in Web 2. Don't get me wrong. And there's a fantastic, designers. Some of the experiences we have still are fantastic. And often with the Web 3, because it's so focused on the technology and solving that problem, it might miss those jumps a little bit. So you see the challenges kind of hit with that adoption element. And I think that's where, if we get that kind of frictionless on-ramp, it's going to be much easier for people to get on board with it. They feel safer in the process. And I guess, we talk about feeling safer. I don't think it helps with some of the kind of terrible news stories that come around these scammers within the Web3 space. And it's almost like 4 steps forward, 3 steps back because of some bad players in the space. But yeah, I think that's what I see as the kind of the true real gateway into the more practical Web3, a very clear on-ramp, leveraging things like, proper dApps that don't, that probably just feel like you're on-ramping onto a normal app, leveraging some of the great things we've learned within Web 2 and then bringing them forward into Web 3, but leveraging the technology of Web 3 behind it.
Cool. Yeah, I want to stick a little bit with that practical side of things. And I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here.
Yep.
So Web3, it's all just bored apes and imaginary trainers, isn't it? Like it's what are the actual proper practical opportunities for brands and advertisers that would like to get involved in the space?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I've maybe touched on a little bit with bad players. I think the 2 examples you just gave, you've got to remember they're one super large scale. They have huge amounts of budgets, and they've kind of gained mass popularity through whatever reason, famous people buying them, or big corps or companies trying to kind of shoehorn their way into the Web3 space. So I think there's much more to Web3 than those kind of 2 players that you talked about. And I think the greatest opportunity for brands and advertisers looking to get involved in that space is through, I think through kind of actually user engagement. I think through considered and utility-based NFT programs. And I can probably give a couple of examples to add a little bit more to what I'm talking about here. So there's been some shockers, we know, from the NFT side of things. There's been some absolute shockers. There's been some scams. There's been some, terrible stories along the way. But for brands getting involved in the space, I think Nike have done a fantastic job with what they've done. I think what they've really capitalized on is being considered about when they plan out things like a smart contract. So Nike, their traditional model was make products, sell it. You know, they've got a huge secondary market for trainers, for example, but they make the trainers once, they sell it for whatever price they decide, and then they might go for 10x elsewhere on StockX or whatever program, to whatever platform they get resold on. And Nike don't see any of that, right? Apart from the, you know, probably the brand loyalty or whatever it kind of sits underneath it. With the NFT aspect side of things, you can release a product, build it once, and then they can continue to make money on secondary sales. So that's what I mean by a considered kind of NFT strategy or project, where they're making money on the first sale and then they're making money every single time it sells after that. So that's because it gets really compelling with brands as well. There's also some really cool stuff that can happen on the back end with Web3 wallets and NFTs, where they might be able to retarget advertisers, and I can talk about that a little bit more later. But on the NFT side of things, another really good example is Starbucks. So for me, they've nailed what redefining loyalty looks like. And this happens in waves, and we saw it happen from kind of, you know, remember when Tesco's Club Cards was a really big thing, and I'd say that's very Web 1, you know, and then we saw the evolution of what loyalty meant within like Amazon for Web 2, you know, people were willing to pay Prime. What Starbucks have now done is they've got a reward-based kind of blockchain loyalty program that had an NFT gated entry to this, and I'm sure you're very aware of it, but for anyone else listening, so what they've done is they've sold an NFT for around about $100. They've got people to engage and kind of work with their with the program that keeps them kind of loyalty points and other things, sends them to raffles and various things like that. And then off the back of it, they get rewards with their best coffees, or if they try new things or whatever, they get rewards for that. And then the blockchain element is, can you trade that or swap that? You don't want to have free coffee for a month because you're traveling or whatever it is, and you can trade that. Again, I think they sold them for $100. They're now going for about 2,000. So that's crazy from an increase point of view. It's a real uptick. But also you've got that kind of customer loyalty because people want to be within the experience, and then you've got the kind of community build that fosters around that. So yeah, that's kind of the NFT side of it. I briefly touched on around the decentralized advertising. I think this is where it gets really key, and as you know, we work closely with Alkimi Agency. But what decentralized advertising really means is it's running ads without the reliance on huge centralized platforms such as Google and Facebook. This can provide better privacy for users, transparency for advertisers, much cheaper fees, so you can spend money on the good stuff, right? For brands, you know, you can on the more exciting stuff rather than bombarding with ads. And I think again, where this can get really interesting is we are seeing the sunset of cookies in 2024, I believe. And so that's what we primarily use to target ads. Now, where's that going to go? Well, it talks about adoption in kind of one of the first questions you asked me, and the increased adoption of kind of the on-ramp to Web3. If we increase adoption in Web3 wallets and you hold an NFT, you could use those to kind of target your ads, and that could almost replace the cookie. And then what gets quite interesting about that is because a wallet's kind of a faceless person, you go off what's in their wallet, right? So the transactions that have gone on behind it, but it doesn't have to be invasive. You know, you have the control as the user of what you get served, right? We all have different levels of our kind of attitude of what we like from an advertising point of view. But for brands, then that can get really interesting, because if they know they bought that Nike NFT, or they got their NFT receipt with that Nike purchase, and they might be able to serve them the socks, the ads, the things that come after. So I think that's the kind of two areas I think that are going to be really interesting. I mean, there's probably lots other, and like just to summarize on that, I think for brands and advertisers, it's important to stay up with the latest trends, really understand your audience, and take full advantage of the potential opportunity in the space. The technology's there. It's more just about how you utilize it. And I wouldn't say it's a one size fits all. You know, the Nike example is very different to what Starbucks are doing. So yeah, I think it's a really exciting space to be. There's lots of opportunity in there, but that's what we're trying to solve at Aidgensi with the brands that we work with.
Yeah, it's, you know, you mentioned a couple of times about the engagement side of things and that spirit of community, which could be the next generation for brand interaction. It's yeah, giving not only a product, but also giving people a say in their brand and the future of their brand that they get involved with. I think that's one of the most fascinating aspects of it, is that they, it's this community is at the heart of these Web3 techs.
Absolutely, yeah. I think community is really key, and I think the shift of you think about, obviously there's a huge market already, but definitely Gen Z, they love that kind of fan to fan engagement. So it's almost like the brand creates a space for the fan to then remix their content, make it their own, make it their stamp. That's why you see the rise of what I'd say TikTok sits on the kind of 2.5 scale at the moment, where they've got some Web3 elements, but it's kind of, it feels more Web2 with the traditional app-based interaction. But yeah, it's that remixing of content, that fostering, building a community. Then there's that identity element as well, that people want to be associated with a brand, but they want to have their own spin on it. And that's where things like, the Nike project and the NFTs, that's kind of developing that identity. So yeah, it's a really exciting space to be playing in. I think the more and more the adoption kind of increases, we're going to see that more kind of fan to fan. I kind of call it engagement, which is that community aspect.
Yeah. So for my last question, I had a bit of fun in terms of some of the perceptions of Web3 tech. But genuinely, what do you think from a consumer perspective that the hurdles that brands will need to overcome, that agency will need to overcome in terms of those perceptions of Web3 tech?
Yeah.
And looking beyond our own bubble, like you said, I suppose.
Yeah. So I think for the Web3 community, they need to look out and also understand that not everyone has gone on the journey and they're not quite where they are now. So it's almost like going back to basics. I think I talked a lot about adoption. So brands need to make it very easy for users to kind of on ramp to that process. And I think it's happening already. We're working with Fireblocks at the moment to help with that. So almost kind of creating a Web3 wallet in the background without even kind of realizing it. Obviously you opt in, so it's not, manipulation, but it just feels like a one simple click of the button, and then you're already integrated with that Web3 wallet. It's kind of taken care of. So it's just a kind of evolution from that Web2 to Web3 without even realizing it. The second thing is regulation. So it's tough because I think governments are trying to figure it out. I know a huge shift is at the moment from the US, potentially looking towards like EMEA for Coinbase at the moment. Was it Coinbase or yeah, maybe Coinbase? I think it's Coinbase. Quote me on it later. I'll correct it if it's wrong. But because the regulation is changing, so I think it's just staying up, understanding that and the kind of the barriers around that, and then also knowing what markets you're playing in, just being very kind of acutely aware of that, because that obviously could become a bit disastrous if you're as a brand, if you're not up to the regulation. Again, that's finding probably a good partner, and leads into the kind of the last point, which is confidence in players in the space. So it's a safe pair of hands. We talked a little bit about some bad players in the space already, but I think finding decent Web3 partners, that understand it, that are staying up to date with the latest trends, as well as understanding some of the successes and failures. That's really key. We have to look at the failures as just as much as the successes. I guess, Adidas was a bit of a bomb with their NFT project because they didn't put the guardrails up and they trusted, a bit of a bad player partner. So I think that's pretty key. I think some of the other hurdles would be like lack of awareness. So a lot of people still aren't aware of the potential Web3 technology. So there's probably an education piece that comes around that for brands. So, maybe slightly contradicting myself there. Can you on-ramp them without them realizing it's a Web3 thing, or do you want to educate them to get there so they understand what they're participating in? There's two sides of the coin to that. The complexity we briefly touched on as well, which, simplifying what that is. You can have a very, we all use the internet. If we were to be wiped off the face of the earth and start again, we wouldn't, you and I probably wouldn't be able to start the internet again. We don't understand the intricacies behind it. So, that exists already from a Web 1, 2, and 3 basis, but how do you make people feel comfortable in that space and confident in using it? interestingly, the user experience as well, that's got to, I think when I first kind of got into the crypto space, it was super hard to kind of get anything. It felt very scary. There were those moments when you're transferring things between wallets and, not knowing that money's gone anywhere. And I think with some safeguard rails and a really nice user experience, just with small messages to say, look, we're processing it. I think it's happening more and more at the moment, but increase of that, to make people feel safer within that would be really key.
Yeah, I mean, confidence in the system and confidence in the players you're working with seems to be a pretty big one there. I'm going to ask my last question, which is, what are your hopes for Web3, and what do you want the future of the internet to look like?
I think control back to the user is going to be really, really key. So people feeling empowered for whatever platform or whatever DApp they're using, any interaction with a brand, it should feel like you've got an element of control of it. So I think I want to give power back to the users so they can really feel like they're a part of something. And I think that's the shift we talked a little bit about, which is being part of that community. So control for the user. I think the trust element we talked about a fair bit. I think more success stories than negative stories. So I want more good players in the space, more people actually solving problems, not trying to make a quick buck. Investing. Not pulling out of coin offerings or whatever, or dumping it. So I think better players in the space, more control for the users. And then I think that will then help increase the adoption, which ultimately will then see everything rise up, because the more users, the more people using it, more people interacting it, that's when we get better feedback loops, understand what people really want, how we can improve products and those sorts of things. So they're kind of the boring ones. Then the more exciting thing, I think, is innovation. What can we solve? What can we do? Like, there's so much stuff that we haven't properly utilized blockchain technology for. I mean, Alkimi are a great example of looking at a boring, old, legacy, broken advertising system and leveraging blockchain technology to solve a problem. That's exciting. Even if you're not into advertising or anything like that, you then get to take back control of that. We worked with a company called Genico, who they are similar to Ancestry.com, but they put a blockchain spin on it. So for anyone that doesn't know, Ancestry.com is where you kind of take a little blood sample, send it off, and they tell you where you are from in the world. Well, Ancestry.com don't make money from you buying that little tester kit. They make money from selling your data.
Yeah.
So back to what I said about user control, what Genico have done, which is really cool, is they sell it off. They give you the same sort of response as Ancestry.com with where you come from and all those sorts of things. But they then rather than you kind of just selling your data, you can make money from your data. So you have ownership over it. So you can opt in and opt out. That's really exciting. That's really cool space to be playing in. So overall, I think the future of the internet should be more open, democratic, user controlled, exciting, and solving problems that we don't probably even really know we have, but leveraging blockchain technology to do that.
That's all we have time for anyway. So George, thanks so much for your time. It was a really great chat. Really good to hear from you. This episode's going to go on the site as part of our Web3 hub in association with Alkimi Exchange, where we have loads more stuff. You can read about more of the stuff that George and I have been talking about today. But yeah, thank you for your time.
John, thanks so much. Cheers, and speak soon.
Very welcome, and thank you for watching.